Okay, and we're recording. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited. So you may not know this, Steve, unless you watch my videos, but it's become like an impromptu or accidental tradition that I start every video like this, like, "Hey guys, I'm super excited to bring you," you know. so today's super excitement is brought to you courtesy of Steve Diamond. Steve, welcome to the channel. Thanks for
Hello
being here.
there.
Yeah.
Nice to be with you. Nice to be with you. Like seeing each other's faces.
Yeah,
Finally.
yeah. So this is really fun. I put this I categorized this one under making new friends because this was my first time actually seeing Steve I guess face to face, even though it's in a digital medium. But we've corresponded a fair amount.
Oh yeah.
Because we've worked together on a couple of projects and stuff like that. So let's talk about that. How did you Let's do it like this. Tell people how you first like became aware of me. Like how did you hear this about this crazy girl named Casey?
Um. So it had to do with the first noir anthology from Bain.
Yeah,
Noir Fatale.
which you have a
I
phenomenal story in. And
yeah. It's the one in that anthology. It's a prequel to the to Servants of War that
mhm,
Larry Correia and I wrote together.
mhm.
Um, and it's the origin story of the guy who in any other book would be the villain. So but he's the good guy's villain, so it's okay.
Yeah, right, right. It's that
But
kind of book.
yeah, Larry knows that I like detective fiction.
Sure.
He knows that I like noir. He knows that I like these things. And so he pulled me aside one day and he just said, "Hey, Steve, I'm doing this. I'm doing these noir anthologies with Bain. Would you want to write something for it?" I said, "Yes." When the thing is, when Larry comes to me and says, "Do you want to write something for this?" It's less of a question, and
Yeah.
it's more of a, "Hey, Steve, get ready to write this thing."
Yeah, you're gonna do this
Um,
thing and I'm gonna need it. Thanks. Thanks so much.
yeah, yeah, and so I said, "Okay, well, whatever." And and he said that he had a partner on
Uh-huh.
the project. And I said, "Oh, well, who's that?" He said, "Oh, this author named Casey Azell." I said, "Oh, well, that's cool. I don't know who she is." And he said,
Yeah.
"She's awesome. She flies helicopters." I said, "Oh, well, that sounds rad." So pretty shortly thereafter, I got kind of the contract and the pitch and stuff from you.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing that I noticed, I opened it up. I opened up the contract, and I'm reading through, and I'm like, "Oh, yay, another story, yay, and it's gonna pay me money. That's always nice."
Right.
And then I noticed the word count. It was like 8 to 10,000. I looked at it and I went, "Is this a typo? That seems long." And so I kind of stared at it for a sec, and then I thought, and then I'm an accountant by trade, and
Yeah.
so very quickly accountant brain took over and said, "More words means more pennies.
Mhm.
So suck it up, Steve." Uh, so I just happily went about it. Now, the funny thing is, and I blame you, and I blame this anthology, the first anthology on this, because this was 3-4 years ago now,
Yeah,
I
I think
think.
it came out in 17.
Yeah.
So
Um,
5 years ago now.
yeah, so it's been a minute.
Yeah.
But what it did was it's at that like 8 to 10,000 word range, his because of the story I wrote for you. um, it's actually kind of become my favorite length
Your,
of
like,
short
happy
story.
place. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much every short story I've written since then, unless I was intentionally trying to keep it super, super lean,
Yeah.
has been right around 8 to 10,000 words.
Yeah.
Um, I just feel like I can tell a better story with that length.
I
Um,
like that length too. It gives me a little, especially for things like science fiction and fantasy, because it gives me a little bit of room to actually world build, which is super
yeah,
hard to do in a short story. Um,
I
and and
agree.
and so having it be that like more as I've done more and more short stories, I've noticed that they edge more towards the 10,000 word range rather than the 8,000 word range. Unless
Yeah,
I'm specifically trying to do something like you said, super lean, like flash fiction or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And
I,
so, later on, last year, excuse me, last year when I wrote the story for the third noir anthology,
mhm.
um, and I the first thing I did was I opened up the contract and I scrolled really quick to the wordage just to
Uh-huh.
see if it was the same. And when I saw that it was the same, I kind of gave myself a mental, fist pump because because I remember talking to you about this because I had two stories in mind. I
Mhm.
could have either done another story set in the Age of Raven series,
Mhm.
or I could have tried something new with a character that I've wanted to write for a long time. My as I lovingly call him, werewolf cop. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
it's it sounds super B movie, but it's really not. It's super like dark and serious.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Uh, and both you and Larry both said, why don't you do werewolf cop? And
Yeah.
so I got to write that, and I'm super super pleased with that story. I can't wait for people to read it. I honestly think it's one of the best things I've written.
I mean, I haven't read your whole catalog, but it is an incredible story. And I was very, I was super stoked to get it. It was super easy to edit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really loved it too. I have the feeling this video might just become like an I love you man fest. So, if you guys are not into that, go ahead and skip this one. But like, it was seriously, I've now edited two stories by Steve Diamond, and if I'm completely honest, which I'll try to always be with y'all, I'm a fan, right? I like your style, I like your voice. I
Oh, thank
like
you.
the one of the things that you sort of have your reputation for is as a horror writer,
Yeah.
and one of the things that really struck me about your story in Down These Mean Streets, which is the third noir anthology, which, by the way, if you're watching this video when it comes out, we are looking at an early 2024 release date for that one. So get up for that. It's super exciting.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
excited.
yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. But one of the things that I really liked about the story was that I could see that horror story influence in the. I mean, it's still very much a noir story, which is not
Yeah.
horror. It's different. Um, but you could see that influence there. You could see that sort of edge of the what's the word I'm looking for? uh how you can see it in the character's psychology, right? You
Yeah.
can see how their perceptions of things were really sort of amping up the tension and amping up the pathos, and that to me is a hallmark of good horror, which I only
Yeah.
ever read and never watch because my overactive imagination would never let me sleep.
It's funny, right? It's funny. Like, I eh, again, I style myself as a horror author, and a lot
Uh-huh.
of people say that I am. I rarely ever get to write just full on straight up horror.
Right.
A lot of times because I'm writing stories for Bane,
Yeah.
and Bane doesn't really do full on. Gosh, I'm
Horror,
sorry.
sure.
Gosh, I'm
Inconvenient
dying
company.
here.
It's all good, man.
Bane doesn't really do straight up horror.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, the elements of horror are just littered throughout everything that they do. Um,
Yeah.
and especially anything that has my name on it. But uh, so it's fun to me when I get to write that stuff, and it's really and I quite enjoy it when people recognize it.
Mhm.
I remember reading your edits for the story, and it's called A Devil's Bargain.
Mhm.
Um, and I was reading over the edits. Gosh dang it. And there's one section, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's one section it's very, very violent.
Mhm.
Um, but it's also horrific and it's interesting and
Mhm.
stuff. And you highlighted the paragraph and you're like, and there's the horror author. I'm like, yep.
I do remember doing that. Yeah, I do remember doing that.
And I remember talking with Larry about that same scene,
Uh-huh.
and he goes, "Oh yeah." He's like, "That scene was rad."
It was
He's like, "Just
gutty.
yeah," and I'm trying to be different. The story's about a werewolf,
Mhm.
and werewolf fiction has been well and truly explored, I think. But
Mhm.
I really wanted to try to do something just slightly. I don't know that it's different. I just wanted to amp it up a little bit. So
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a great story. It's a great character. Do you have plans to do other things with that character? Oh,
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
correct
The
answer, sir.
idea is to write a book. The right
Yeah.
idea is to write a series.
Yeah.
So the first book, the funny thing is this short story technically takes place after the end of what the first book is going to be.
Okay.
Um, so the first book, the first book is going to start with him with the main. I mean, this isn't a spoiler. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a werewolf cop. I mean,
Sure.
but the first book is about him getting turned into a werewolf in the opening chapter.
Mhm.
Um, my dad was law enforcement growing up,
Mhm.
career law enforcement from all the way from patrol to nothing, all the way up to chief of police of a couple
Mhm.
different cities, and so I grew up just seeing that life and seeing those people,
Mhm.
and and one of there are two dangers. There are two major dangers that law enforcement face. One is traffic stops,
Mhm.
and the other one is domestic disputes.
Mhm.
And they're a complete crapshoot. You have no idea what you're going into,
Sure.
and especially with things like domestic disputes, they tend to be serial offenders, so to speak.
Mhm.
And cops they'll have their regulars, more or less. They keep
Yeah.
going to the same place over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter how many times you've been there. Um, there will be a worry that one time it will have crossed a line.
Yeah.
And so, and my dad always talked about how he worried about these things, and all the other cops I ever talked to that I grew up around always said the same thing. And that always stuck with me. And so that's what the opening scene of the book is going to be called. And the title of the book is On the Devil's Side.
Mhm.
And it's from a quote from the show Luther, because that
Mhm.
show's awesome.
Mhm.
And and so that's what it's going to be about. And the entire first book is going to be about a child abduction ring
Mhm.
that's put on by the Fae. So because they're evil.
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, so
That's
yeah,
so
I'm
cool.
planning on doing that. So that's I'm really excited to write some of that stuff, but
I
I've got like a gajillion other projects I have to get done first.
I have no idea what that
So
means. I've never experienced that in my life.
well,
Well, I hope I get to read this someday though, because it sounds really cool. I'll be honest, you kind of made me love the character a little bit, you know?
yeah,
He's a he's a good dude in an impossible situation, and that's like my
yeah,
kryptonite, you know? Like
yeah. I think some detective fiction or in some noir fiction especially goes down the road where if people don't read that stuff and don't like that stuff enough, they tend to think that it's pure nihilism. And I don't know that I agree with that take.
Yeah.
Um, because now world weary for sure,
Mhm.
jaded for sure.
Mhm.
Um, but these detectives, these cops, these PIs, whatever you want to call them, um, they're world weary, but at the end of the day, they want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
oftentimes I mean, that's kind of the hallmark of noir and stuff, right? It's world weary, working against a system that
Right.
it feels like your wheels are spinning.
Right. Yeah.
And so
Knowing that doing the right thing may not make a difference, but you do the right thing anyway because it's
right,
the right
right.
thing. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that statement. I agree with that assessment. Because I, it's this whole concept of the gray night, right? Like we highlighted that in the second anthology, which you didn't have a story in. Sorry about that, but you were very
Gosh,
busy writing Servants of War at the time, so I can
I
fully
really
understand.
was. I really was.
um, but uh, but yeah, it's this character archetype of, and we specifically did it with our male detective characters because that is such a staple of noir fiction. But this really could apply you know to any sort of anti-hero character, is that they're not, they're they're always going to do the right thing. They're not always going to get there in the nicest of ways.
Well, and sometimes doing the right thing is a bad result.
Yeah, exactly,
You know,
exactly.
I mean,
For themselves
I'm
and
a
for other people. Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big fan of putting characters in situations where they have to make the best bad decision that they can.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Because it's
you know,
interesting.
it is, it
Yeah.
is. And I think it lends to the character really well. It lends to their character consistency really well as
Yeah.
you go on. And it gives them extra conflict to work with that
Right.
sticks with them, you know?
Right. And I
So
think it makes them relatable
mhm.
too, because the now, hopefully most of the time the choices that we have, the bad choices that we have to make aren't on the level of some of what our our characters have to deal with.
I hope
But
not.
still, we've all been sitting there and being like, man, there's no win here. I'm
Yeah.
picking my poison. Um,
Yep.
so yeah. Yeah, the lesser
Yep.
of two evils is still evil.
It is. It
You
is. Um, and so, it's good. I like writing this. I like writing conflicted characters.
Yeah.
I like writing, um, like I said, characters have to make tough decisions. But at the end of the day, they're like the main character. His name's Kamari Hicks. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Um, and and he's going to try to do the right thing, even though uh, that end option might not actually end up being there. But he'll walk down that path.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there's a quote again from the show Luther, um, where the main character says, "I'm not corrupt, but I might be a little dirty,"
Yeah.
and and that really shows, I think, kind of the duality of the night, so to
Yeah.
speak, right?
Sure.
The gray night, as we
The Grey
talk
Knight.
about.
Yeah.
Um, they'll roll up their sleeves and they'll get their hands dirty to make sure that you know they'll get themselves dirty so that other people don't have to.
Yeah. That's another trope I
And
love too.
yeah, and I love. I mean that's Bosch. I mean
Yeah.
that's Bosch in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and Bosch was one of my favorite. Well, it is my favorite detective series of novels
Oh, yeah.
ever, and the TV series is excellent.
Yeah.
So,
My husband watched it. I never watched it. I should do that.
oh,
Um,
it's so good.
yeah. I'll
It's
put it
so
on the
good.
list
Oh
in all
yeah.
my spare time for
Oh, the spare
watching
time.
TV. Well, I mean, shoot, man, you're one to talk. So you've got Servants of War out, um,
Yeah,
working on a sequel.
yeah. The sequel's called Instruments of Violence,
Uh-huh.
and
Great title.
yeah, it's due at the end of the year. So the initial book title, it was like a project title, like we were being all secretive, or like we were a movie or a video game company or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It was called Grunt's Eye View, was the
Uh-huh.
original title of Servants of War, because when Larry pitched it to Tony, um, he said it's basically like a grunt's eye view into this war between two countries that's been going on for a century. And the book it's very trench warfare fantasy.
Mhm.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
very, very dark. Um, and but
I
right
have
when
to
we
tell me
got
that rains all the time in your book.
it rains a lot. It rains a lot, and which in a trench warfare setting is about the worst thing you can
Yeah.
possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And I wrote that scene. I had a
Mhm.
blast writing that scene. And but we sat down and we wrote it all out, and we shipped it off, and Tony looked at it, and she said, "Yeah, this title sucks." We're like, "Oh, okay." So she said, "Okay, guys, come up with a new title." And so Larry said, "Okay, Steve, come up with a new title." I said, "Yes, sir." Hold on, my dog's barking.
Oh, no worries.
Easy.
We love dogs and cats and all kinds of interrupters on this channel.
Give me one.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Yeah. Yeah, while Steve's out doing that, I'll just tell you guys watching. As of the time that we're filming this video, Servants of War is currently available in, I think it's available in hardback and mass market now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it came out in mass market 2-3 months ago, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, congrats on that then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's done pretty well. Hence the reason why I got greenlit for a sequel.
For a sequel,
Um,
right?
but we were really excited. We were really excited to write it. Um, Both Larry and I are super, super proud of how it turned out.
Yeah.
Um, and but it when we finally started talking with Tony about new titles, she said, "Come up with two." So I came up with two. I came up with Servants of War, and I
Uh-huh.
came up with Instruments of Violence. And she said, "Wow, those are both great. Use one for the first book and use one for the second book."
Dude, she
And so
pulled
I
that on us too with the
so I
anthologies.
kind of I know. So I kind of looked at her. I kind of squinted my eyes at the email, and I went, "So you're saying there's a second book, right?" And so I quickly respond. I said, I think Servants of War is good best for the first one. I think Instruments of Violence is going to be way better for the second book.
Uh-huh.
And hurry and hit send, because if I do that, then there's no takebacks.
That's right. No take backsies.
So and then we ran into Tony down at FenCon down in
Mhm.
Dallas last September, where Larry
Yeah.
was the guest of honor, and talked with her, and she's like, "Okay, yeah, cool. Like, she's like, I just need to check a couple numbers, but yeah, we'll get working. We'll get working on that contract for book two."
Yeah.
And then that contract came through in November.
Awesome.
So I'm working on that. It's Larry and I, we've already met, we've already outlined it. I'm doing a second. I read through the book once already, and then I'm listening to it again, just to take out like a bunch of extra weird random notes,
Mhm.
ideas for scenes to fill in some of the gaps in between places and
Mhm.
major plot points and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we are very, very excited. That book's due towards the end of the year,
Yeah.
um, which means it'll come out next year at some point, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and hopefully it does equally well,
Yeah.
and we'll get quickly greenlit for a third book. I don't know if you saw Larry's rant a couple month or two ago about about sequels for fantasy novels
Oh,
in
yeah.
full
About
series.
people who refuse to buy one unless the series is complete. Yeah.
Yeah, and we certainly felt that
Oh,
on
yeah.
Servants of War.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for
It
sure.
if if the book hadn't had Larry's name attached to it, the sequel probably wouldn't have got greenlit,
Right.
because it wouldn't have sold as much, just because
Right.
I'm me.
Right.
I don't have a loyal following like
You're
Larry
a new
does.
guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm
Um,
feeling that too. I'm currently working on a sword and sorcery project, and
Sweet.
I my intent is to thanks. My intent is to write the first probably 4 books before I do anything with it.
Well,
So,
that's what Howard did for Bane.
yeah,
Howard
and
Andrew Jones has he before he even approached Bane, he had the first 2 written and
yeah,
was partway through the third.
yeah.
So,
And I think that there's multiple reasons for that, right? One of them is the whole, taking 3 decades between installments is wearing on the fans, and I as a fan who has suffered through some of that stuff, I get it. I do. I fully get it. But the other thing is that, so I'm a hybrid author. I publish on the indie side as well as
right,
with Bain.
right.
And in the indie world, you always do that. You always do a rapid release. It's the only way to build that kind of momentum, because the best advertisement for your book is the next
Is
book.
this next book? Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, in fact, I'm doing the same thing on a space opera that I'm concurrently working on, that I intend to publish with Chris Kennedy Publishing, my indie publisher.
Sure.
The first book's done. It's been done for a year. I'm about midway through the second book. And we're going to do the first 3 books, and then we're going to do an anthology, because the intent is to make it kind of a shared world property. Because I too would like people to write in my universe and me get money for it. So hashtag capitalism.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, but yeah, so I mean, that's, it's almost not even optional anymore, right?
Yeah.
At least in the indie world. Now, trad pub is still a place where, and this is one of the reasons why I will never go full indie and I will never go full trad pub. My intent is to always be a hybrid author, because I like the freedom to be able to spend a year writing a book if I need to, right?
Yeah.
To be able to say, okay, this is a complicated project, Scott, for whatever reason. Many layers of story, multiple POV, whatever it is. I'm going to take a year and I'm going to write this book. And the trad pub model allows me that freedom. At the same time, on the indie side, if I have something where I can crank out, 4 or 5 novels in the series and then release them all at once, that's a big bow wave of momentum that will
Yeah.
come. And then start looking at your other stuff too. So
Yep.
yeah.
No, I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, that's, I mean, I'm in the same boat.
Right.
I'm co-authoring some stuff with a guy named Mike Rothman,
Hmm.
um,
I
who's
love him.
also, yeah, he's written some stuff with Dave Butler for
Yeah.
Bane, time trials and stuff.
Time
But
trials, yeah. He would be embarrassed to hear me say it, but we met at, I'd known him on the internet a couple years ago, or for a couple years, but, we met face to face at 20 Books in Vegas this past year,
oh yeah,
and I found him absolutely delightful.
he's
And I don't think
funny.
he would enjoy being described that way.
Oh, he's very funny. Like you see the way he types things and the way he writes things, and it
Uh-huh.
puts you in a certain mindset of who he is. And
Yeah.
then you listen to him and you chat with him, and I don't know, the way he speaks is very almost, it's way more relaxed.
Yeah.
Um, and so,
Yeah.
yeah, but no, so he shot me an email earlier this year and said, that he was writing a spinoff to his super successful Levi Yoder series,
Uh-huh.
and he wanted me to write it with him.
Oh,
So,
cool.
um, so we've so it was going to be one book, and then, one of
Famous
the
last
other books,
words.
I know, and then the other book that he was working on wasn't working for him, and
Yeah.
so he said, "What if we switch a couple things, and this just becomes another book in that series?" I said,
Oh,
"Okay,
yeah.
sure." And then like 15 minutes later, he's like, "Oh, and I have a great idea for the third one." Uh, and I just remember looking at my email going, "I don't even why does this happen? Why does this happen to me?" Um, and so, uh, but yeah, so book one of that is basically written. Book two in that is basically written.
Mhm.
And then he and I are going to outline book three at 20 books this year.
That's cool.
So,
That's cool.
yeah, so and we're gonna do the same thing, very, very quick releases for
Mhm.
those just to kinda ride the wave of that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's I think you have to.
Yeah.
Um, the traditional publishing is nice because I think it helps you cultivate a loyal fan base.
Yes.
Um, whereas I'm not yet convinced that that the fan bases that pure indie people get are loyal to them.
So, I have a theory. Do you wanna hear it?
Mm, I do.
I think that the secret sauce, the magic recipe is that, um, indie writers with loyal fan bases don't just rely on their writing. They have managed to create a full up fan community complete with an identity that their fans, assume.
Mhm.
And honestly, Larry is a perfect example of this with his
Oh,
whole
yeah,
Monster Hunter Nation, people
absolutely.
walking around wearing the title of hunter. You know what I mean? I see it because I'm a romance fan as well, and I read a fair amount of indie romance authors. And one of my favorite indie romance authors just spent like half the year at the top of the New York Times bestselling list, but she started in indie. Her name's Lucy Score, and she has a very engaged, very loyal, like fanatically loyal fan base that's all like on social media. And the reason it is that way is number one, her books are fantastic. They're well written. They hit all of the required tropes for
Mhm,
romance, for small town contemporary romance, which is primarily what she does.
mhm.
And but she has this community where she engages with the fans via social media, and the fans engage not only with her but with each other, and so they're able to form these what they call parasocial relationships,
Mhm.
where they, these people are convinced. I mean, they've never met Lucy Score, but they feel, and I say they, but I mean us because I'm definitely one of them. But we feel like she's our best friend. You know what I mean? And so anything that comes out with her name on it, we're gonna go and we're gonna buy, we're gonna pre-order, and we're gonna tell all our friends about it. So I have been, in fact, this YouTube channel is a big part of my sort of experimenting with trying to build that fan community for myself, for people who enjoy my work. It's like, hey, if you like my work, maybe you'll like me. Come be one of my friends, come be part of this community and tell everyone else how cool I am and how awesome my books are so that they can go buy them and then be part of our community as well.
Yeah. No,
It's a little
there's
culty,
a lot
but
of no. Well, I mean, when was the last time a cult ever hurt anybody? Uh, so
is this where I make a Kool-Aid joke? I don't know.
I know, right? That's exactly where my head went to. Um, but no, I think there's a lot of
Don't
merit
worry,
to
it's just
that.
water. It's fine.
I know. Well, no, I think there's a lot of merit to that
Yeah.
because uh, there's a large segment of the indie community that's just churn and burn,
Hmm.
um, and a lot of them can attain a certain amount of success and
Hmm.
stuff, but I think if you want true success,
Lasting
you
success.
lasting success,
Yes.
it's loyalty, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's less about, you know, I can, I can I can put out this book, right? I can
Hmm.
put out this book
Hmm.
and I'm a pretty good salesman and I can get and I sell at conventions and stuff all the time and I can and at conventions I regularly sell out because it's, I'm a good salesman.
Hmm.
But that only gets you so far.
Yeah.
Um, you know, you have to sell them on you.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if you sell them on you and they've bought you, it sounds very prostitute-y. If they, if they buy you,
Yeah.
then they're much more likely to buy in marketing and such on any product that
Right.
you put out, whatever that is.
Right. Well, and it
Um,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish.
no, I was just
Yeah.
shrugging. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think it all comes down to connection, right?
Mhm.
So for me, this epiphany happened as a result of the great apocalypse of 2020, where we were all isolated. I was over in Japan,
Oh,
like
that's right.
it was it was it was wild world,
Well,
man.
and they're even and from what I understand, they were even more like
They were more and yet less restrictive.
interesting.
It was weird, yeah, yeah. We'll have to talk about that in person sometime because there was yeah, in some ways Japan was way more restrictive. Like they wouldn't let hardly anyone into the country. About the
Right.
only people that were allowed into the country were American service members, and they had to come to the base and weren't allowed off the base for 2 weeks. Um, so, so I don't think that they would have allowed us in if they could have helped it, is what I'm saying.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. For sure.
Um,
For sure.
but it's like this whole geopolitical strategic thing, like, okay, we got to let your people in anyway. Um, but yeah, but in other ways, they were a lot less restrictive, but but what I learned from that whole sequence of events and watching people and seeing kind of the effects that people talked about. One of the things that I was actually really really kind of I guess I looked at it as a silver lining, right? It was unfortunate that it had to happen, but I'm glad that it really opened up the conversation about the mental health effects of things like that on particularly on younger people, right? Because I have a 20-year-old kid who her high school she did get to have a graduation. She graduated in 2021.
Mhm.
So she got to have a graduation, but like her sports were canceled for 2 years. She barely got to play varsity softball, and there was a significant effect on her and on her classmates. And we were in a place where we were allowed a lot more freedom than a lot of kids here back in the States, for them. Um, so I was glad that it opened up that conversation about the mental health effects of disasters and pandemics and lockdowns and being in school and not being in school and all those kinds of things. But what I think a lot of those conversations really boiled down to is there is a basic human need for connection, and it can be filled in different ways, and it kind of needs to be filled in different ways because it's awesome hanging out and talking to you like this, but I'm really looking forward to meeting you in a couple weeks in person at
Oh
LibertyCon
yeah,
because it's not the same. It's not the same.
you're
This
right.
is great, and it fulfills some of that need to be like, hey, yeah, Steve Diamond, he's a cool dude, and I got to hang out with him for an hour on my channel, but it's not the same as hanging out and sitting and having dinner with you in Tennessee or whatever. um
Absolutely.
and I'm kind of digressing, but my point is that when you build that fan community, the key is that you offer a means of connection with those people who are your fans. They can connect with you via your community, they connect with you via your work. They build that parasocial relationship. And I may not know who each of my fans are by sight or whatever to be able to say, "Oh, hey Jay, Jay, it's good to meet you," or "I recognize you." I don't, because I've never seen their faces, but we can still connect. We connect through my work, we connect through my community, we connect on my Discord, because that's what that interaction, a way that you can really utilize that interaction. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. No, it's true, and that's why, like let's we'll take Larry for example. Larry connected with his community because he was a gun dude,
Mhm.
and he was very political, and that for a lot of people, especially the target audience of Monster, the initial target audience of Monster Hunter,
Mhm.
that that built a bridge between him and his fans. They
Right.
felt like they could relate to him.
Yep.
Um, I mean, think of a lot of the authors who we read growing up. For me, it was guys like Terry Brooks and
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And you read these guys, and because social media wasn't a thing in ye olden times, um, you know, they were just they were effectively a mythical figure
Right.
living off in Never Land.
100%. Yeah.
Um, and uh, and so it isn't until you meet them in person that you were like, oh, okay, I understand who this guy is now.
Yeah.
Um, it's much easier for us to not be mythical now,
Yeah.
and it's very easy for us to somehow form a, I don't know, well, to tear down the wall that's between us and who our fans are, and say,
Mhm.
look, I'm just a dude.
Yep.
Um, that's why at conventions I wear heavy metal band t-shirts,
Mhm.
because it's just one more way in which a person can come up and say, hey, I like them too.
Yeah.
Or I talk about barbecuing all the freaking time, because that's one more thing that someone can say, oh, you like barbecuing, dude, I like barbecuing.
Yeah. Yeah. One
um,
more way of connecting. Yep.
yeah, and so it we're authors, we're not gods. We're just people.
Mhm.
And so the when people realize, when authors think they're gods, that's when trouble starts happening.
Yep.
Because they put themselves, they're standoffish with
Yeah.
the idea of relating with fans. And I've seen a few ginormous authors do this to their fans. Well, and they did it to me. um, which is why I always appreciate it when I meet one of these big, huge time authors, and they're super awesome.
And they're nice. Yeah.
Like I met Terry Brooks, and he's the cover quote to one of my novels, and he was super awesome.
Yeah.
Or I'm a big horror guy. I met Robert McCammon,
Yeah.
and he couldn't have been any nicer to me.
Yeah.
And then you meet other authors, and you're like, yikes.
Yeah.
You should not ever be allowed in public. Uh,
You're not a nice person.
you are terrible. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and so it's, these days where it's so easy to connect, it really is easy to connect with people.
Yeah.
Um, And so it's important that we actually try.
Right. Yes, and there's an additional dimension to that we haven't really touched on, and um, it, it you're a I don't know you very well, but my perception of you is that you're a fairly capable dude, right? So this may not have been something that crossed your mind, but a couple of girlfriends of mine and I, actually, authors Marisa Wolf and
Mhm.
Melissa Althoff, we have over on Chris Kennedy's YouTube channel, we have a series called Feral Ladies of CKP because that's who we are. We're feral. um, and I think we were actually talking about this on one of our episodes about how, yeah, we want that connection, um, but sometimes it goes bad, and that is something that for whatever reason, socialization, or just the fact that I'm half the size of most of the men that I know. That's something that is not always in the forefront of my mind, but it's always in the back of my mind, right? In part because of that, that's how I've been trained to think,
Well, yeah,
and
there's that.
yeah, so you want to connect with people, but you also want to have appropriate boundaries and fail safes, um what's the word I'm
Well,
looking
yeah, I mean,
for? Outs.
yeah, and several years ago, um, Larry had Laurel Hamilton out,
Yeah,
um, to to he basically got her to come out to the Comic Con that we had here in Salt Lake,
right.
and then of course later on they kept that connection. They became buddies, and
Mhm.
and then she contributed to the noir anthologies as well.
She sure
Thankfully,
did. She
she's
sure did.
awesome.
She was one of my Terry Brooks type authors, just so you know.
Oh, I was super impressed meeting her.
Yeah, she's so nice.
She was just super, super great and
Yeah.
nice. But, the other people I met at the same time were her security team
Yep. Mhm. Yep.
because, when you're as uber successful as her,
Mhm.
um, and and a very small percentage of her fans have it in their heads that because of the content that she writes, that means
Yep.
that she's game for whatever. Well,
Yeah.
she's not.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
and so she had two at the time. She had two very, very competent security guys with her, and they were great.
Yeah.
Um, and I was talking with some of Brandon Sanderson's assistants the other day, and they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, that's why I put them in touch with Laurel's old security team
Yeah.
just to get pointers and stuff.
Yeah.
Just because I don't know, the more success you have just on a percentage statistical basis, the more likely you are to have someone who's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Right. Mo money, mo
Um,
problems, just like
right.
Buffy said.
That's right. The great philosopher Puff Daddy, or Diddy, or the artist formerly known as
The
Diddy.
artist formerly known as Diddy, yeah. Showing my age here,
So
calling him Puff.
yeah, so it happens, and the funny thing is that is something that I do worry about,
Yeah, I think we
because
all do, a little
we
bit.
well, I I think some of us of a certain persuasion do, and that's
Yeah,
because either we've grown up with military or law enforcement
yeah,
or certain mindsets around us, and so we do threat assessments more often than I think
that's a good
the
way to put it.
the average person does.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, so I'm an accountant, but at one of my previous jobs, I was over HR as well,
Mhm.
and I had to fire a guy because of he had substance abuse issues and all sorts of things. Before all the substance abuse, he was a super reliable employee, and you would never have thought anything ill of him. After the substance abuse issues, you, you had to change your way of thinking.
Mhm.
And so he came in, and I had to fire him. And that day, I was like, you know what? I'm worried. Like for some reason, something in my head triggered, that, and I thought, you know what? I don't like where this could possibly go because that guy isn't rational anymore.
Yeah.
And so I carried that day, and and partway through my firing him, he got really aggressive.
Mhm.
He stood up. He was starting to shout and get angry, and he was pacing closer and closer to me. And I was by myself because this was still in kind of the after effects of COVID. So there's
Mhm.
hardly anybody in the office. Um, I had a witness on the phone, but that wasn't going to do me any good if, he
Right.
decided to do something.
Right.
Now, fortunately, I was able to talk him down.
Right.
But when you have an experience like that and you start asking yourself, like, crap, am I about to have a really bad day?
Yeah.
And is that guy about to have an even worse day?
Yeah.
Um, and I had a similar experience down at a Comic Con in Phoenix where
Yeah.
some rando approached me at a gas station, and I wasn't carrying, and I thought, well, here we go, about to
Yeah.
punch my ticket, boys.
Yeah.
Um, when you have that stuff, um, it changes your way of thinking, uh, and because of my close proximity and I mean, Larry Curry is one of my best friends on this planet,
Yeah.
and that dude's brother to me. But when you're in proximity to a guy like that, I mean, well, both he and I have gotten death threats over stuff.
Yep.
So, you know, you you have to account for that.
Yeah.
Um,
100%. 100%.
and so you just have to. Um, and again, Larry's very capable. I'm fairly capable. Um, but if I weren't capable, um, that would cause a much larger extra level of worry, I think, for
Yeah.
me.
Mhm.
Um, and if I were a smaller individual, or if I were female, or if I had a disability, or whatever, um, I'd be very worried about perhaps a level of fame going a step too far.
Yeah, well, and I think that there are obviously things that you can do, right?
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, I think that because otherwise I wouldn't be trying to build a fan community of people
Right.
who identify with me. But like, viewers of my channel know I don't show my kids on here. I talk about them sometimes.
Correct.
I don't use their names, but I don't show my kids. Um, I I don't have, I I talk only in general terms about where I live. I live in the Richmond area. I don't don't give anyone my address or my phone
Yeah.
number.
I live in Utah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, there's things like that, and and a lot of things that we just kind of consider, at least I have come to consider as common sense precautions, are things that I'll always do, right? When I go to a convention, I almost always go with a battle buddy or a girlfriend, or
Have a
you know,
wingman.
yeah, exactly. I go to Dragon Con and my husband comes along. Now my husband comes along because he enjoys drinking his face off for 5 days. But he also he also comes along just, to support me and to be there with me. And you know, that way, if nothing else, I'm not alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And alone is vulnerable,
Yep.
particularly when you're not as large or not as physical or not as, able as the people around you.
Yeah. Well, and on the guy side of this, the you do the wingman thing because um guys like Larry, for example, are um he's been accused of a lot of stuff,
Mhm. Mhm.
but he's always with someone.
Mhm.
And so that other
It's not an
person,
accident.
it's usually me,
Yeah.
is like, nah, that never happened.
Right. Right.
Um, or you know, Larry and I, we record all of our panels
Uh-huh.
because, if someone's going to accuse us of saying something, well, I have the audio.
Yeah.
Um, you know, now you'll meet my wife at Liberty Con. She's coming too.
Oh, that's
Um,
exciting.
yeah, she's
I
great.
I loved, by the way, sorry, small digression. I absolutely loved the April Fool's episode of Writer Dojo with her and Bridget. That was hilarious.
Oh gosh. She's funny. My wife is she's she's really big into gymnastics. She
Uh-huh.
competed from when she was like 6 all the way up through college, and now
Yeah.
she's a national rated judge and all that kind of stuff. And and so she's used to talking about things. She's used to like being professional. Um, but when she's around like the writer world, she has no idea what she's doing.
Uh-huh.
And so she'll kind of freeze up a little bit, or like on the Writer Dojo show, which for your listeners out there, watchers, listeners, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, that's a writing advice podcast that Larry Correa and I do.
Link in the description.
Yeah, and it's weekly,
Yeah.
every single week. We've been doing it for nearly 2 years now.
Mhm.
Almost we're approaching our 100th episode pretty quick
That's
here.
awesome.
Um,
Congrats. That's really cool.
yeah, it's a lot of time talking
It
to each
is.
other. It's a good thing we like each other, right? But we get into that room, and one of my buddies lets us use his studio,
Uh-huh.
and Larry and I just kind of sit back and we just let Bridget and Jenny go,
Uh-huh.
and they had no idea. They're like I think my wife's comment right when the show started was, "What am I doing here?"
It was awesome. It was so
Um,
great.
but they had a good time,
Yeah.
and Larry and I are in the background. We're just dying the
Oh, I
entire
bet.
time. We're laughing so
Oh, I
hard.
bet. I bet.
Um, but it's fun. It's fun to take my wife to these conventions. She's probably going to go to 20 books with me in November as well.
Very
Um,
cool.
so I have a room, so
Right.
might as well room with someone I like.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Uh,
right.
so it's good. So it's good to have. It's always good to be around someone
Yeah.
when you're at these places.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's fun.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I fully agree. We kind of got a little dark there. Sorry about that. That happens on this channel sometimes.
Eh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a horror author.
Yeah.
It's whatever.
Yeah. Military
So
veteran. Dark humor is my
yeah,
thing.
exactly. It's all part of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so let's see. We have almost been talking for an hour. This is awesome. You're very cool, and I like you very much.
Oh, thank you. I like you too. No,
I'm glad we decided to be
it's fun,
friends.
right? No,
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this to you. Gosh, it was either after Noir Fatale, or it was after Down These Mean Streets. I
Uh-huh.
remember mentioning to you how much I enjoyed working with you.
Oh, thanks.
Um, just because uh, I think us as authors, the author world is a lot smaller, I think, than
Mhm.
people realize,
Mhm.
and it's nice to when you meet certain people. It's nice that you just kind of gel and you click,
Mhm.
and you can have fun. You can have good conversations with people.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, that was how Larry and I met.
Yeah.
I was running a book review site at the time, and I wanted to interview him. I'd read his book,
Yeah.
and we got talking over dinner because we ended up at the same dinner, sitting next to each other somehow.
Yeah.
Fate, I guess. And and I was like, "Oh, so what do you do besides the writing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm an accountant." And I went, "Really, dude? I'm an accountant." We gave each other the secret
The
accountant
secret
handshake.
accountant handshake. Yeah.
You know, um, and it's crazy how quickly something like that can ramp up to a
Yeah.
friendship and beyond. And so, um, but the flip side of that is sometimes you meet some of these people, and especially when you meet them in person, instantly. You're like, nope, that's a big nope. And not only nope, but nope, nope, nope. Not going to happen. Uh,
Well, I won't ask you to name names because that would be rude,
no,
but
no, right. Um, but I enjoy working with people who are just fun, who are friendly,
yeah.
and you know who kind of understand how the game works. And
I
and
Yeah.
I felt that instantly with you.
Oh, good.
It was nice to, you know, I mean, look, if Larry says you're cool, then in general, well,
Okay, fair enough.
then I got nothing to worry about.
That's
Um,
Yeah, that's how I am with Marisa Wolf. If,
yeah.
yeah, if, she was my co-author for several of the Four Horsemen universe books that we did
Mhm.
together, and she's, we're damn near joined at the hip, if I'm perfectly honest. Funny story. I'm going to steal her story here for a minute. She was at Fantasy this past year,
Mhm.
and I was unable to go at the last minute because of my flying job schedule. And so she was there, and someone walked up to her and was like, "Where's your other half?" And she was like, "Oh, Jeremy, he's back at the trailer." And the person looked at her like, "Who the hell is Jeremy?" Jeremy's her husband, the person who should logically be called her other half. But they
Yeah.
didn't mean Jeremy, they meant me because we're always together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I get it. I feel you on that one. I feel you on that one.
But no, it's good, right? It's
Yeah,
fun to be with. It's fun to work with people who you respect and who respect you, um, and who appreciate what you do, and also who come up with fun stuff like,
yeah.
this trilogy, so to speak, of noir anthologies. Like, it's just a great fun idea,
Well,
and
thank you.
maybe it'll be a Bane trilogy.
Yeah, oh,
Uh,
maybe,
you know,
maybe.
uh, maybe we can talk Tony into it being a Bane trilogy.
I
Uh,
think so. I think the key with that is titles, right? Because you know how you were talking about how she was like, "Well, we'll use one for the first book." She totally did that to us too,
yeah,
because as soon as Noir Fatale earned out, I emailed Larry. I was like, "Hey, this happened. I think we have a window of opportunity. I'd like to do it again. Are you in?"
yeah,
And he was like, "Hell yeah, let's do it."
yeah.
And so we emailed Tony, and with the concept of the focusing on the archetype of the detective, because we'd done the femme fatale, so
Mhm.
equal time, et cetera, et cetera. And we're like, we have two potential titles, both from Raymond Chandler quotes. One is "No
Right.
Game for Knights," and the other one is "Down These Mean Streets," because it's from that longer quote, says, "Down these mean streets, a man must go who, yada 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 yada,
Yeah.
who is not himself mean, all the other things." Love Raymond Chandler, by the way.
Oh yeah.
In case anyone ever didn't know that, what rock have you been under? Anyway,
No, I'm big fan of Chandler. Big fan of Hammett.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we anyway, so that was in our pitch to Tony, and she came back and she was like, "That's a great idea, and I love both titles. Why don't you do two of them?" I was like, "Oh snap! Okay, here we go."
Yes, ma'am. I mean,
so,
it would
so
have
I
been
think
rude. It would have been rude for you not to say yes to.
right. I mean, and you know how when you're like when Larry Correa says, "Hey, will you do this? Rewrite this story for me?" It's like that plus an order of magnitude. When Tony Weisskopf is like, "Hey, why don't you do this project for me?" You're like,
Right.
"Yeah, mm-hmm,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll
I'll
get
do
right
that
on that,
project.
boss.
Yeah, yeah, I'll start right now."
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
she wields her power with great grace.
She does. She
Yeah.
does. It'll be good to see her. It'll be good to see her again
Yeah,
here
yeah. No, I
in
love
a
her.
couple
I love
weeks.
her.
So,
I am so excited at LibertyCon, or I am so excited to see you at LibertyCon. I left some words out there. Where else? So, what else? Where else can people find you this year? Are you doing any other conventions?
the only other one. Well, okay. So if you're Utah or really really close based, um, we're me, Larry, and a couple other kind of local folk. We're doing it's just a small 1 day convention called Writers Cantina.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the idea of it is for it to grow into a bigger small con
Mm-hmm.
over time. So
Mm-hmm.
this year it's just a 1 day con. I think next year the plan is for it to be 2 days. Um, so we're doing that. That's on July something. Um,
On a day that ends in Y in July.
it is. I think it's July 13th.
Okay.
July 8th. I was totally wrong. Okay, so that's on July 8th, down in the Salt Lake area.
Okay.
So I'll be there for that, and then after that, I'll be at 20 Books,
Mm-hmm.
um, later on this year. That's like November 6th through 10th or something like that this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
So I'll be there for that. I don't know how much I'm going to be doing. You know, I know Larry typically teaches a couple classes there, and then does a couple presentations. I think part of the idea for that one is for us to make good use of our recording equipment for the Writer Dojo.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
for
we'll
sure.
be talking to a lot of people there.
For
Plus, I
sure.
need to like I said earlier, I need to outline a book with Rothman there.
Yeah.
The third book in our collab series.
Right, right, right.
So that's pretty much the only things I'm doing. We were going to both Larry and I were going to be usually he and I um, sell books together at places like FanX
Mhm.
or Comic Con, whatever you want to call it. And we were going to be at the local Comic Con down in Salt Lake in September, but the booth that we normally sold in doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
And so we're like, I mean, we could get our own booth, but
But then you have to be
at
there the
this,
whole time.
but then I'm very tired,
Yeah.
and I don't want to deal with that this year. Maybe
Yeah.
next year,
Yeah.
we'd just have like the Writer Dojo booth, and then have because Dave Butler, DJ Butler, who's another Bane author, he's local to us.
Yeah.
A good a good friend of mine and Larry's, and then back east, Chris Rocchio,
Yeah.
he comes out to that convention most of the time too.
Yeah.
And so the four of us together kind of could make a nice booth.
Sure.
Um, but
Sure.
we'll see. But yeah, so this year it's just those it's
Just those
Liberty
2?
Con here in a week and a half,
Mhm.
and then that Writers Cantina, and there's still slots open for that. It's going to be a pretty chill, low key
Yeah.
convention.
Yeah.
July 8th, and then of course 20 books in November. So that's physically where I'm going to be at this year.
Where can people find you or your work or your podcast on the internet?
Okay, so Writer Dojo, that's the Writing Advice podcast by me and Larry Correa.
It's a fantastic podcast, by the way. I've been waiting like all video, and I don't want to interrupt you to say this, but the content, you guys, if anybody watching, if you guys are interested in like upping your game, perfecting your craft, it's a great free resource. It's like a master
It
class,
is.
honestly.
It is. We try. Larry and I had that idea for a long, long, long time,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you've thought this too, or you've experienced this too, Casey. And that's that. Like you go to enough conventions, you end up on enough panels
Yeah.
to where you have these conversations. You
Yep.
talk about these topics all the time, right? But um, for a lot of people, going to a convention is actually it's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Um, if it's not local to you, then your airfare, your hotel,
Mhm.
your if you gotta get a rental car, the food, whatever. And so for a lot of people, that prices them out.
Yeah.
Um, so Larry and I were talking one day. This was years and years and years ago, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could like just take all the stuff we always talk about, either on panels or just between us, and make it available for everybody.
Yeah.
Uh, and then right around COVID, uh, we really started talking about it, and then in 2021 we started it up, and it's been great. We started with the idea of 30 minutes. Most episodes are 40, 45 minutes.
I have no
Every
idea
now
how
and then
that
they
happens.
go to an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, don't
And
look at the
then
timestamp right now.
I know, whatever. But we the whole idea was we were tired of all of the writing advice podcasts that we saw out there being just a checklist of what you're not allowed to do,
Yeah.
or it focused on um, you're not allowed to write that because you're X, Y, or Z.
Right.
Um, and so we kind of thought, you know what, like there's a spot there for people who just want to hear about how to write things,
Yeah.
who just want to be entertained,
Right.
and who just want to be told, hey, it's cool, go for it, bro. Like, just go for it, dude. Just go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do, kind of no nonsense. Every now and then we'll get a smidge political and we'll start railing against a specific group here and there,
Yeah.
or a specific author here and there. But in general, man, we just want people to improve.
Yeah.
We just want to be the internet or the internet mentors for a lot of people, like because both Larry and I have been mentored by countless people,
Sure.
and so we kind of wanted to pass it on. And so that's the Writer Dojo in a
Yeah.
nutshell.
Yeah,
again,
it's a great podcast. Highly recommended. Check the link in the description. There's you guys are coming up on your 100th episode, which is super cool.
100th episode.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah,
I think we've only missed in 2 years, we've only missed 2 weeks.
yeah,
1 week was because our sound guy, Jack, almost died. Like literally, he had COVID.
yeah,
He
yeah,
almost died.
yeah,
And then the other one was Larry was in the middle of a deadline on book tour and doing all these things, and we just didn't have time.
yeah,
But yeah, so that show goes live every Wednesday morning.
yeah,
Um, so you can always find me there. My website is authorstevediamond.com. So
yeah.
you can go there. The site is like currently being built, and so it's a little, we'll just say it's dusty. Lots of hanging tarps everywhere,
Construction
and
tape. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So you can find me there. Grab me on the Twitters, the Facebooks, if you feel like delving into those hives of scum and villainy.
Yeah, I'll have links. I'll have
Yeah.
links in the description below. Also, guys, check if you haven't yet. Check out Servants of War. It's
really good.
It's really good.
It's really, really good.
Especially so I'm a big history fan, and I know we're way over, or well, we're 6 minutes over an hour, but I gotta get this out there. Because this is one of the things that I loved most about both your story in Noir Fatale and Servants of War overall, is that I'm a big history fan, and my favorite podcast of all time, Writer Dojo is definitely top 3, but my favorite one of all time is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History.
Hardcore
And
history, yeah.
yeah, and he has this amazing series about the Western Front in World War I called Blueprint for Armageddon. And it's one of the things that I loved about it so much was that it really conveyed the atmosphere and the just the extreme of the experience that those men experienced on the Western Front in World War I, on both sides of the conflict. And that same atmosphere, that same mood, that same horror, if I can use the word in that sense.
Oh yeah.
Really comes through so well in both your story in Noir Fatale and in Servants of War. And there's fantasy.
There's a lot of fantasy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fantasy. I mean, I pitch it to a lot of people as, the Witcher meets 1917.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that fits.
You've got that really, really dark fairy tale world underneath everything. And then, you build on it by just adding the horrors of trench warfare.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's so good. So go check that out, you guys.
Yep.
So, and then look for the sequel, Instruments of Violence, sometime next year.
I believe so. Yeah, that's the plan. And
also, look for Down These Mean Streets, and you can meet Detective Kamari Hicks, who is.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited for people to read that story.
Yeah,
I think they're going to love that story.
Me too. So we should probably wrap this up, but thanks, Steve, for joining me. I'm so glad we finally made it happen.
I know.
Would you like to come back? I'd love to have you back sometime.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that for sure. We'll talk about, I don't know, a bunch of other random stuff.
Whatever. We just kind of meandered down the road on that one. So
yeah, that's kind of how these go. That's kind of how these go. But yeah, I've had a blast talking to you. Can't wait to see you in a couple weeks. For those of you watching, again, check the link check the description for all of the links. Check out Steve's books. Leave me a comment if you've listened to Writer Dojo. Leave me a comment and let me know kind of, what's a piece of advice that you've gotten from the Writer Dojo podcast that really struck you or resonated with you or has been useful for you. And if you haven't listened to Writer Dojo, leave me a comment and let me know, if you think it'd be something that you'd like to check out. Because even if you're not really an aspiring writer, there's just a lot of fun anecdotes, a lot of cool insight. And it's a good podcast for sure. It's great for my 40-minute drive from home to work on Wednesday mornings. Right. So, all right, you guys, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to Steve for coming on the show. Give me that Chuck Yeager thumbs up if you haven't done so already. Really appreciate that. And I'm Casey Zell, and this is my writer life. We'll see you later. And now comes the awkward moment where I try to find my mouse and click end recording.